Changing Minds, How to Admit When You're Wrong. Let's give an even bigger round of applause to our moderator, who we're welcoming back on stage. I hope she's back there. The lovely and eloquent Lauren Chen. And also returning to the stage is an equally amazing yet unrelated Chen. Let's give it up for Melissa. Next up, we have quite possibly the hardest working person in the room. Founding member of Vice News, director of innovation at Fusion, co-founder of Subverse. The real question is, does Tim Pool ever sleep? And is he a human being? Since gaining prominence with his Occupy Wall Street reporting, he has built a massive independent media YouTube following, reaching over 1 million subscribers. Hold your applause for the man and give it up for the beanie as you welcome Tim Pool. And finally, let's bring out an incredibly popular, or so I'm told, independent vlogger who has over 900,000 vocal followers. Carl Sargon of Akkad Benjamin rose to prominence in the heydays of Gamergate. His story... Not yet. His story arc goes from being a random gamer to YouTube celebrity to aspiring politician. Surely a biopic is in the works. While being a skeptic of theological and political ideologies, he has simultaneously managed to popularize the term classical liberal and made milkshakes great again. Welcome, Carl Benjamin.
All right, so this panel obviously is about changing minds and how to admit when we're wrong, which isn't always easy. So I feel like the logical place to start is, would you guys each, taking turns, want to describe one area, one time that you were wrong and realized it, and how you came to terms with that?
Well, I'm never wrong, so I don't know what I'm doing up here. Actually, no. We were actually talking, I guess backstage you'd call it, and I said there was a story I covered, and I had this like left-wing critic who messaged me and said, "You were wrong," and I said, "Actually, that's an interpretation, but I will accept your interpretation and edit an update to the video because I have absolutely no problem being wrong. If I'm wrong, then I'll issue an update and I'll say, hey, wow, I was wrong. In fact, most of the time I'll say something like, I could be wrong about this, so fact check me, but this is what I think. Like, I just don't think I'm smart. I don't think I'm right all the time."
So for me, one of the things that jumps to mind was the time I sort of participated in outreach tweet culture. It was an article in the New York Post that I shared. It basically said the new iPhone had just come out, and it basically said that the people say that the latest iPhone is sexist because they enlarged the iPhone XS or something, like it was just a bigger phone. And it didn't fit into women's hands anymore, and so like these feminists were angry that it was just marginalizing women by not considering the fact that women had small hands and couldn't hold the iPhone. So it's an outrage article. I retweeted it as just another example of look how crazy this culture got. But then I read the article, and several people had pointed at me, did you realize that this entire article was based on like 2 tweets from people who were like Twitter eggs? And I realized, like, oh my God, I just amplified something, and I shouldn't have, because it's not people said. It was like literally just 2 Twitter eggs said it, and it's not representative of the culture. So I apologize. I retracted a tweet, but that's just what you have to do if you want to remain credible, and also genuinely not wanting to participate in the culture that I am continuously criticizing.
There's nothing wrong with being wrong. The problem comes when you don't correct yourself. And I know who doesn't watch my channel. When they yell at me, you never admit you're wrong. I'm sure that the people who follow my channel here are aware that I've got at least about half a dozen videos where I'm posting an update or a correction to myself. I mean, in 2014, I featured myself in an episode of This Week in Stupid because I'd made a mistake. I've never been afraid to admit when I'm wrong. I post, like, even when it's the most bad faith actors, like H-Bomber guy, I'd been lazy in a video many years ago, and he called me out. He was like, no, this is, you've been lazy here, you've missed this, and so I just put, you could put a screen over the video. And I just put a link in the description saying, no, this guy's got me, go watch his video to see how I fucked this up. But I'm gonna leave it up because I'm not ashamed of my mistakes. I'd be ashamed if I didn't correct them.
As much as I probably don't trust Jim Jeffries, there's this really amazing interview he did with Jordan Peterson, which apparently was mishmashed. But he's talking to Peterson about the bakery and whether or not a baker should have to bake a cake for a gay couple. Jordan Peterson criticizes the notion. He then asks him, what about civil rights when they forced, businesses to serve the black community? And Jordan goes, maybe I was wrong about that. So I don't know what the real interview was like, but the fact that, Jordan Peterson is the kind of person who would just think about it and go, maybe I was wrong. That's one of the most important aspects of whatever it is this conversation is about, is having someone present a point and you not being hostile to it. You simply saying, oh, I didn't consider that. Wow, that changes my view. I should do some research. It's that simple.
But you'll notice that that's eminently more respectable than any other response he could have given in that regard. Because I watched that too, and Jim Jeffries had him in a logical trap. It was like, you either agree with this logic or you are a hypocrite, and you're going to start getting angry and aggressive. And Jordan did the respectable thing. He just did the right thing. And I saw left-wing activists who hate Jordan Peterson all over Twitter with viral tweets going, oh, he got him. And it's like, no, he didn't. Jordan Peterson admitted his mistake. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
But think about the activist mentality of, haha, if you admit your mistake, that's a bad thing, don't do it.
But also the press, so I didn't watch this video, and this is the first time I'm hearing about it. But, okay, if you consume a lot of YouTube videos, you would probably have seen this. But every time you see a major profile of Jordan Peterson in any mainstream press, this is not mentioned. They don't paint him as somebody that has epistemic humility. They paint him as some sort of, misogynistic, patriarchal professor. And I think that's really problematic. Oh, I used that word.
It's such a huge problem right now that any apology is an admission of guilt. No matter what you do, it's like they're just waiting for you to say, what is it? There was like a meme that apologizing in Canada isn't an admission of guilt because they apologize so much. Yeah, if I do something wrong, if I do something that offends you, I might apologize even if I don't think I did anything wrong. I'm trying to better our circumstances and kind of bring us together. But now that's weaponized against you.
Well, the next question I want to ask you all is kind of especially relevant since you guys all have huge platforms and you have followings. I'm sure that at some point or another, each of you has probably been accused of being a no-good, dirty grifter. So in the era of political commentary, where everything you say is public, people can pull it up at any time, how do you, especially when you're maybe looking at other people's profiles or even your own, tread the line between the idea and the reality that people do change over time and the possibility that someone might just be grifting, saying something because it's convenient at the time? And as a culture, is there any way that we should be able to discern it? Should we be skeptical when people profess to change their beliefs at seemingly convenient times? Or should we just be open to the idea that, yeah, minds change?
So this happened in 2014. Are we okay? Sounded like some sort of police radio. So the phenomenon that was Gamergate was essentially the same that we've seen in almost every other walk of life, including up to Trump. They are not wrong to say that Trump is a continuation of Gamergate. It's what it is a continuation of the resistance to the sort of moral browbeating from the left and the freedom to just be left alone and tell jokes, frankly. But Gamergate was an early response to this. And the radical left activists who were calling everyone who objected to their censorship and oppressive nature they were really, really aggressive and really, really kind of cultish. And one guy called Ian Miles Chun said, you know what, I actually really think I'm with the wrong crowd here. The guys opposing us actually seem much more accepting and nice than on our side. Our side are cruel and vindictive to the people that are in their own crowd. And so he apologized. He said, you know what, I think I'm wrong here, and I'm really sorry. And as soon as I saw it, I made a video just saying, Ian, I accept your apology unconditionally, and I'm never going to bring this up again. And I think that's the way you've got to do it. You've got to show that you are forgiving, because if you're not, you don't accept the apology, and then there's no way of ever actually having any kind of redemption for having done something wrong.
Grifters definitely exist. And there are a few people that I would absolutely love to just stand up and start screeching about how they're just doing this for the money. But then I realized people think the exact same thing about me. And so while there are people that I absolutely believe are playing a game politically because it's a lucrative business, I will never play the game of trying to accuse somebody because we're all in the weeds. You know, it's like, I think about the content I do across various channels, and people say things like, hey, Tim, you're very critical of Antifa and things like this. And one of the common things that comes up, which I find hilarious, is that people say, like former Occupy activists, for instance, will be like, Tim, what happened to you? You've changed. And then I pull up this interview from the end of 2011, beginning of 2012, where I said basically the exact same thing. And I think a lot of people move, like everyone kind of moves around, their opinions change, and then they assume if we're not on the same side anymore, it's because only you changed. So there are certainly some progressives I know where I've been like, you know, shifty-eyed, like, what are they doing? And then I stop and I think, you know what, man, nah, you should definitely watch their channels too and just try and decide for yourself. Ultimately, it's about trust. And I think it's silly to assume people aren't really true believers in what they're saying. Like, everything's not a business, man. The biggest point I can make about this is people claim, like, I'm trying to pander to an audience to make money. And I'm like, I have no idea who, what the audience will be. I make a video where I talk about what I think, and then people come around to hear me. It's an inversion of what's actually happening. They claim I lie to make money, when in reality, I just say what I think. And then it turns out people who share that opinion and that mindset will come and gather around. They see it in a twisted light, you know?
I think the charge of grifting is something that you sort of levy at somebody that you're trying to say, this person doesn't sincerely hold these set of beliefs. And it's always used to attack people's personalities. Like, this person's just a hypocrite, he's not sincere. I've seen several friends who have been accused of this, most notably Andy No, and also someone like Dave Rubin, who's been accused heavily of being a grifter because, you know, he called himself the last liberal, and now he's, you know, gone full right, and a lot of people have accused him of that. But at the end of the day, it's kind of impossible. It's the most uncharitable way to paint somebody's intentions, character assassination. And what it also does is it allows you not to engage with that person's arguments. So it's really toxic. And you, at the end of the day, will never know. Unless you can get behind, you know, somebody's heads, you'll never know whether that person's really grifting. And it's a bad faith argument.
And this may be surprising to many people. I actually know Dave Rubin, and he is absolutely, I would say this, he's absolutely not a grifter. You know, I would say, if anything, he tries very much to be restrained in, you know, being too aggressive. And it may be surprising because you've seen a lot of videos where he absolutely rags on, you know, the regressive left, and there's memes about it. But like going to his show and talking to him, I think he tries really hard to be kind of, maybe stoic isn't the right word because a lot of people are going to criticize that, but there's a criticism of him that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and in reality, I think he's trying to restrain himself. You know, I think I've talked to him in private, and I think he's a smart guy who knows what he believes what he believes. And just to throw it back to what you said, the easiest way to discredit someone's argument is to not argue and just accuse them of bad intentions, but it doesn't actually move us forward.
Now we're gonna move on to inappropriate jokes being used against you. I believe some of you might have experience with this. I'm not familiar, but
Why are you looking at me?
So we're living in an era of outrage culture, and people love nothing more than to look through old videos, old tweets, and try to find the juiciest thing you've ever said to use it against you. In their opinion, they're trying to hold you accountable for actions or opinions you've said and that you might still have. Some other people see it as just participating in outrage culture and trying to cancel people. How do you view that balance between accountability for past actions and just plain virtue signaling in order to get outrage points?
I stand by every outrageous thing I've ever said. I don't care. To hell with them. I don't judge myself by their standards. If they are unprepared to, I mean, for example, the interview with Ben Shapiro and Andrew Neil that was broadcast on the BBC or wherever it was, and Ben Shapiro accused Andrew Neil of being a leftist, and this is ridiculous because he is actually a conservative. But Andrew Neil's also culpable because he's bringing up tweets from 2012 in an interview in 2019 with Ben Shapiro. It's like, why are you doing this? How does this give you anything about, get any information about Ben Shapiro's current understanding of the world? You're not actually making any kind of good faith argument, or you're trying, or even good faith line of questioning. What you're trying to do is kind of humiliate him on national TV. And this is something that journalists do a lot. And so essentially, I'm just at the point where I'm like, I don't care if you found something I said in 2014 offensive. You know, I must have said something last week that you found offensive. Can we not have something a bit more relevant? But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if someone's doing that, they probably aren't going to believe you if you say, well, actually, I changed my mind, or I made a correction, or whatever. I've already apologized. They don't care, you know, so don't really engage with it. Like all the things, it's just an ad hominem attack. It's not any kind of way of attempting to have any kind of dialectic with you, to find your actual stances, your actual knowledge on a subject. So honestly, just ignore it.
There are jokes we don't tell anymore. There are performances we don't do anymore. The United States has a history of very offensive comedy that we have all culturally deemed to be something you shouldn't do. And there's some videos of photos of politicians in like the 80s making some of these jokes. And I think it's ridiculous. If someone comes out today and is fighting for civil rights, to go back into their past and be like, but you used to be a bad person. I don't care. It's like what you said. But what's really strange to me about all of this is how does it work? I don't understand. You know, how does a sane and rational person see this story and think, wow, 30 years ago they were wearing blackface. Oh man, this person must be evil. It's like, but they're a civil rights activist now, you know what I mean? Like, people evolve, but culture evolves. And I think people often purposefully are trying to misuse cultural context. But the biggest question I have, which I probably can't answer right now, maybe you guys have some thoughts, is how does this work? Like, I mean, like, the tactic seems to work. Thank God for Dave Chappelle to come out and just push that line back. It won't work on him. They came out first when that special dropped, and they tried saying all the worst things in the world about Dave Chappelle, and it didn't work, so they called him boring. But good, because I don't understand why it works in the first place, because I just don't know anybody who's going to hear a joke and be like, that was literal.
It's actually a really cunning way of isolating people from their support, because if you can take something out of context from five years ago or something, the chances are that the people that they're associating with now don't know anything about that event. But when they're, you know, on Twitter or wherever, it's just flashed up in front of them. Look, so-and-so did X. Here's a clip of it. You must defend your friend. I mean, everyone's going to be like, well, hang on a second. I'm not familiar with what's going on. I'm not going to just leap in the line of fire. And so it's a way of just salami slicing like another piece of your support off and to fully isolate you, so they can essentially dogpile you. It's very, very malicious. And again, it's entirely bad faith.
The big problem is that it makes it impossible to admit you're wrong. That's really what it's about. If you can't assume that someone is critiquing you in good faith, and we know now, there was a story published by the New York Times looking at, I believe it was Harvard research, that apologies always result in worse backlash. Well, then we end up in a world where it's like, I know I did wrong and I don't care. So that's what's scary to me, you know?
Well, how it happens, Tim, I think, the reason why it happens is it's kind of like a guerrilla tactic. In the sense that if you think of the people, the anonymous people who are doing this, their record is not open to the world. Yours is. You have a history of being on Twitter. My history on Twitter is really short. and I have a fraction of followers of these guys, so I'm safe for now. I mean, the jokes I've made are mostly like bukkake jokes or something like that, but and that's not really. I'm sure at some point it will be offensive, but I'm just too small to really be an issue right now. But it's a guerrilla tactic because some people, like you said, they have a lot more time on their hands, and you have something to lose. You have whole careers to lose, livelihoods, eyeballs to lose. They don't. All they have to do is just anonymously in their basement search, go through this history that you have put out there, and they can take you down. It's like almost like a way of leveling this privilege that you have. It's like equalizing the thing, and like I'm just going to tear this person down.
Well, I think it's important to remember that it's a form of social attack. It's a way to try and discredit you in the eyes of your peers. And if everyone is vulnerable to this, then effectively the only thing we can do is say, well, I accept it. I accept that this person did something in their past that they're not proud of now, and they wouldn't do it in public around us now, But you've just got to be like, because it can happen to any of us, like you say, like any kind of Twitter archaeology. If that's going to be allowed to ruin careers, then we have got to do something about Twitter. You've got to stop using it.
Delete all of your Twitter history.
It's archived, right? It's cached. So obviously, people are very critical of cancel culture out here, and we can all praise Dave Chappelle, but if we look at the short history of celebrities just in recent memory, Kevin Hart apologized, Mario Lopez apologized. Cancel culture, at the very least, does seem to get results. Do you think that the people who have apologized to these outrage mobs, do you think that there is any retrospection on their part, an actual change in opinion, or do you think it's more of a form of societal control? Maybe you still don't agree with them, but you're now too afraid to say anything about it.
If slowly over time culture moves in a direction, everybody will move along with it. But whatever has happened because of social media has resulted in this hard left jerk that is splitting everything in half. So, I mean, that's my first observation, but whatever, if you want to.
I think the most important thing about it is just think of it like there are two ways of morally holding yourself to account. There's guilt and shame, and cancel culture is part of the shame culture. And this is frankly evil. It's a horrible thing to do to someone. That in public you get everyone to point at them and say you're a bad person, because that person. I mean, what choice do you have when all of your peers are saying, "Oh God, you're a bad person. You've got to bend your knee and sort of apologize." It's not an honest apology, it's coerced. An honest apology comes from guilt, when you feel like you have done something wrong. And it doesn't require a giant audience to pressure you and harass you into serving this apology. You do it off your own merit because you feel like it's something that you have to do for your own conscience. So honestly, you've kind of got to be a bit of an asshole about it, to be honest. And when everyone's pointing at you and saying, you've got to apologize, you've got to say, no.
But that's what's scary to me. Because, this panel is called How to Admit When You're Wrong, and sometimes you are. But when we're constantly inundated with BS, eventually you just say, you know what, screw it, I'll never apologize again. And I've seen some of the most horrendous things. I want to avoid getting sued, but there was an instance where a man went on the internet and made some very horrifying admissions, which got him in serious PR trouble. And the PR company my response was, terminate this guy immediately. Like, the things he's saying and talking about doing are unacceptable in our society. But the PR company said, no, say nothing, do nothing. Just don't do anything, just shh. And it worked. And I'm like, that's terrible. Because when there's really something bad, we should change as a society. But now we can't tell what's real and what's not because it's all a political agenda.
It's entirely disingenuous, though. The only reason you do this in public is to have a political effect on that person's career. If you had a genuine problem with someone, you'd come to them personally. And you would say, look, I found this offensive. And then you'd speak to them and try and persuade them on a moral level. Maybe it would be worth you apologizing without being coerced because, that thing was a wrong thing. And if you're not already doing that, you obviously don't think it's wrong. And if it's something that's been taken out of context from 4 years ago, it's probably not wrong. And if it's something about offensive opinions, man, they can just be offended. I don't care.
I think there's a bit of a disparity in terms of who are the kinds of people who are more likely to apologize to the outreach mob and who aren't. Usually, if you are a person who wants to engage within institutions, you're working for Google or you're working in mainstream news media, you kind of have to apologize if you want to keep your job. and if you want to still maintain your livelihood. So, I mean, people like Tim and Sargon who have really built their own empires, they're able to have the luxury to say, yeah, I'm not gonna apologize to the outrage mob, but everyone else who's plugged into the system kind of has to. I mean, the most recent example that I saw was Good Morning America. The host kind of sniggered a little when she was talking about a story of, I don't know the name of the son of Prince William and Kate Middleton, because I don't follow this kind of nonsense.
I don't know the name.
Okay, the prince, whatever. The young, yeah, he's like, what, 4 years old, and they're just about like scheduling his life, and turns out this kid is interested in ballet. And so she kind of laughed a little, and the dance community was offended. Like, you're saying that, you're shaming all the males who have ever wanted to be a dancer and go into ballet and could never do it. And the mea culpa was ridiculous. So they because it's Good Morning America, NBC, I think, or ABC. So they had to rent out like all of Times Square, and they had a public ballet lesson in Times Square. It was just one of those, like, she had to grovel and cry and then talk to members of the dance community. And then people forgave her. The dance community forgave her, and she could move on. But frankly, if she wanted to keep her job at GMA, she kind of had to do that. There was really no other option for her.
There is.
What is it?
Well, technically no, but there was an option out. What I was going to say is there's an option outside of keeping the job, and it's quitting. I'd quit. And so I wanted to push back a little bit because it's not so much that because Sargon and I have built an independent platform for ourselves. I can't speak for Sargon, but I'll say the reason I don't have to apologize is because I've never bent the knee to anybody who is trying to come after me in bad faith. I've only ever done what I felt like what was right and what I should do. And when I worked for companies that wanted to do things that I thought were wrong, I said, I won't do that. And they said, but you have to. I said, no, I don't. I'll be sitting over here. Come talk to me later. We'll figure it out. And then eventually the contract expires, and I say, I'm going to keep doing what I feel is right. So it's kind of an inversion. I think this can be solved when people finally say, if you want me to apologize for giggling, I'm not going to do that. I'll quit. And guess what? You know how ridiculous it would be if it got even bigger and the person quit from the show? I'd be willing to bet they wouldn't want to deal with that bad PR. And if they did, you know what? I don't know. I can understand why a lot of people don't want to lose their jobs, especially if it's very lucrative and you're like, my way of life is more important. I prefer principle. I'd rather live in a van down by the river than sell my soul.
So this whole conference is about trying to bring together different beliefs to have a conversation. This panel is about how to change your mind. Do you think there's anyone out there who is too far gone to actually reason with? And I'm talking about the actual extremists out there, not just Count Dankula, but the people who really are ideologues. Do you think that there's anything that can be done to bring them from the brink? Is it possible to be genuinely too far gone and unwilling to change, unwilling to admit that you were wrong?
Yeah, first off, Dank's a Scot, so there is no reasoning with him. I'm sure you're out there somewhere. But yeah, the problem with ideologues is that they misrepresent their opposition in order to justify doing something that would otherwise be unjustifiable, right? Punching a Nazi. He must be the worst person in the world. Therefore, it's not only legitimate that I punch this guy, but I can enjoy it. I can get pleasure out of something that ordinarily we'd find to be the worst thing in the world. So a sadist is the sort of person who enjoys punching someone. That's a really terrible thing. It's totally antisocial. And once you've built up this sort of series of beliefs that form like a kind of pyramid and justify doing something terrible at the end of it, if it turns out, if someone were to come along and just start unraveling these beliefs one by one, all of these would collapse in on themselves. And then you would realize, Jesus Christ, I've been awful. I have been a truly horrific person. And now I have so many apologies to give out that I don't think my ego can take this. And that's why, like, these ideologues, I don't think that many of them are actually going to be able to do it. This is why when Ian March Chung did it, I was just like, right, we accept it, because that is a really difficult thing to do. And he gave an honest apology. So we don't push him on it, we don't tease him for it, we just accept it. And to show the others that it's actually safe to say, you know what, I might have been wrong. Maybe I don't need to be as hardline as I can. But I think that many of these people have gone so far and for so long in this sort of hardline space that they just can't do it. They can't admit they were wrong.
It can, though, and there are two people that I think are incredible. Darrell Davis, who we are expecting here, and if you're not familiar, he befriended He is a blues musician. He happens to be black, and he befriended Klan members, and they changed their mind when they realized he's a good guy. But there's also Majid Nawaz, and I could be wrong, correct me, but Majid was a terrorist, or I should say extremist. And he now is a mainstream presenter on the radio in the UK. That's right, yeah.
No, that's correct. I probably should have qualified what I'm saying with in the space that created them. I think that you have to draw them out of this space, and this is why I'm so against deplatforming and ostracism, because I think that's what creates extremists. When you're in a particular bubble, you're only hearing the same responses, and you don't get any kind of charity from the other side, any kind of charitable interpretation of anything that you've said or done. And so you just can't leave this space, and you can't be deprogrammed in a situation like that.
The internet scares me, because in the past, when somebody joined a cult, you could physically remove them from the cult. And there are tactics they use, love bombing and lying to you and surrounding you and then coercing you. But now people are in a cult and they're surrounded 24/7 by social media. And they might encounter someone in the physical world saying, that's actually not true, and they'll immediately retreat to their phones, to their safe space with their other cult members. So it's getting scary. I would, that's at least what I'm seeing.
And you notice how upset they get as soon as you start presenting information that's counter to the narrative. This is why I'm hoping that I get to speak to some protesters. I want to know who the Nazi is. I want to know what they've said. And the thing is, as soon as you start asking, you realize these people are incredibly low information. You say, okay, when did this happen? Where did it happen? What did they say? Who did they say it to? And as soon as you ask just questions like that, the whole, like Andrew Breitbart showed this, they just get really upset, they get really angry, and they have to walk away from you. And so you end up with no protesters at all. It's really great.
So I spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time in my day job interviewing former extremists, partly because we're trying to figure out, if we have enough data points and ask enough people who were extremists at some point, in my case, Islamist extremists, what was it that changed their minds? What planted that first seed of doubt that the world that they were indoctrinated to is not the case? If we have enough data points of what was the trigger, could we reverse engineer that? And what content do we need to put out to achieve that effect? And what strikes me about this is that Majid is somebody who's really close to my organization as well. It's so different why and how somebody de-radicalizes. Like in Majid's case, he was sitting in jail in Egypt. He was jailed for terrorist activity, recruiting for Hizb ut-Tahrir, which was a terrorist group. And it was sitting in jail, interacting with other people who were also in jail at the time. And when Amnesty International came to bail him out, he had this epiphany, just like, well, here I am incarcerated in Egypt for these actions, and this organization is coming in, and they still believe in me, and whoa, like this was kind of like his mindfuck moment, and that's kind of the moment that we're always trying to find, but it's so different what pushes that button for everybody, and the day we act like there's just no hope for the other side, that's kind of dangerous. We always have to keep that hope, even if there isn't in some cases, and I know there isn't. I'm realistic enough to say that we all even have family members who just won't even change their minds when you present them with new evidence. But there has to be. We have to believe that there is.
The door
something.
always has to be open.
Exactly.
Our door has to be open because their door isn't.
Exactly.
Just delete Twitter.
All right, so now we're going to bring media back into the conversation. I think right now the idea or facade of the impartial mainstream media is pretty much dead, right? It's widely recognized that for most sources, you either have left-wing publications, right-wing publications, and independent commentary and media has largely followed in the same veins, right? I mean, you have Rebel versus Vice and heck, even Blaze TV. Do you think that the way our media has kind of formed around ideologies is good for giving people a different point of view? Or has it just reinforced echo chambers, therefore making it harder for people to change their minds if they have confirmation bias anytime they open up their timeline?
Everyone in the room knows the answer to that question. It's been really bad. This is why I'm constantly saying you have to choose a series of content creators and media outlets from any point of the political spectrum, even ones you find really unpalatable, maybe even people like David Pachman. And And you have to sit there through their content. I mean, I still have to watch the Young Turks, and it's insufferable. It's like a broadcast from another planet. Like, what the hell are they talking about? But they're so convinced of the rightness of their arguments because there is never a dissenting voice on their show, and they don't talk to any of the opposition. They don't obviously watch any opposition media, and so it's just nonsense. And the thing is, what I find interesting is that, I used to criticize Fox News. Back in like 2008, I was a huge Jon Stewart fan. I used to criticize Fox News because, they're right-wing partisans, blah, blah, the left isn't like this. And now Fox News are the ones who actually have the opposition on. Now, it's always low-hanging fruit. It's never as well represented as it could be or should be, but at least they have that. At least you get someone like Tucker Carlson who does talk to crazy Kathy or whatever, But the left just don't do that anymore. And I used to really like Carl Kalinske, like as a person, and we'd do like podcasts and we'd have really good conversations. And then after the election of Trump, he wouldn't talk to me anymore. It was like, no, he's gone right wing, and I'm like, have I? Oh Jesus, and I don't think it was actually that. I think that he just went further left wing. I think they retreated into the tribalistic nature of where they are. It's really sad. I think it's really sad, but I think that that's not helping them, and it certainly won't help you to only imbibe the media from one side. It'll turn you into a resentful, ill-informed person who just hates the other side, and that is surely what we're all trying to avoid.
How many coincidences until you've won the lottery, right? I think, was it 5 or 6? You're going for Mega Millions. Over the past couple of years, various news outlets have done the exact same thing, and I have to wonder why. They'll publish a bombshell report about Donald Trump and Russia, and then a day later retract it. And it keeps happening. In fact, The Intercept has compiled the top 10 biggest stories that were published and then retracted. And so when it comes to the media, there's a few really dangerous things. If you watch my content, you're trusting that I'm right, but I'm trusting that NBC is right. And so it's just, so I definitely do research. I'll dig. I'll look for various sources to try and figure out if this matches up. But one of the safest things I think we can do in this line of thinking is wait. The other day, Lawrence O'Donnell reported that Trump had some, on his tax forms, loans co-signed by Russia. And I saw that story and said, wow, that's huge. I'm not going to talk about it. You know why? Because a day later, it was retracted. And that keeps happening. And so the reason I asked about the coincidences, do I believe there's this grand conspiracy among these companies where, you got the evil guy with the top hat twirling his mustache laughing about how he's manipulating the people? No. But I think at a certain level, some people think to themselves, if the story is sensational, we're going to make $1 million. And if it's sensational is wrong, we're going to make $1 million, and then we're going to make a little extra money when we retract it the next day. So that's what's really dangerous to me is right now the desperation in these media companies means you'll get Lawrence O'Donnell with one source who didn't review any documents, and that's good enough for him to claim that Trump got loans signed by Russia because the news goes crazy. Everybody clicks it, everybody sees the ads. Hey, we sold our inventory already. We can retract tomorrow, no big deal. I think money is playing a huge role in how the media is becoming overly partisan because they know if they can rile you up and get you angry, outrage sells the best. And I will always say this, whenever I bring this up, I think I'm playing a similar game. I think I put out content where I'm like, this is shocking and upsetting to me. So I don't really know how you break out of this cycle, especially if I think I'm doing the right thing by calling it out, but it's still a part of this, political whirlpool we're stuck in.
And sorry, if I can just add to that, because there's a part of that that social media contributes to this. The viral tweets of the initial fake news that creates outrage, that gets the clicks, millions of people will see that, hundreds of people will see the retraction. And so that adds to the narrative of the partisan side, whichever side it is. And you can see like the tweets, that the narrative gets longer by each chain of event that turns out to be false. And this is why people like the Young Turks feel like they're broadcasting from an alternate dimension, because they've got a narrative that has been debunked, but they haven't seen the debunks. They've just seen the viral tweets, and they didn't bother to look into it any further.
I actually would push back on, I actually disagree that this is a bad thing. And talking about changing minds, I used to exactly think how to think about this media ecosystem, but I went on Michael Malice's show, and
He's
he's
great.
an anarchist, okay, and I'm like far from an anarchist, but he actually convinced me about something, that actually the fragmentation of media was actually a good thing. And here's the perspective. It's that if you think about what media was like in, I don't know, the 70s or the 60s, you had like 3 or 4 channels, and these were what Eric Weinstein would call gated institutional narratives. They were controlling, there was large consensus among the only like 3 or 4 channels that existed. Everyone was watching one of these 4 channels. There was really nothing else. The fragmentation allowed for alternative viewpoints to actually be broadcast. And if you think about, say, a story like what happened with Brett Weinstein and Evergreen College, that would never have gotten, it took maybe like 3 weeks for the New York Times to cover that story. But in a world where there was only these gated institutional narratives, that story would never have come to light. And the reason that it did was because we do have a fragmented ecosystem, and it was kind of upregulated. The signal was upregulated by the far fringe or whatever of media. But eventually, mainstream media cannot ignore it. And so there is a reason, there is a case to be made that this actually wasn't a bad thing.
See, that's a very good point. But this is also, this fragmented media is also contributing to the fragmenting of culture. Because when you have 2 or 3 gated institutions, you're right, the flow of information is very reliable and very easy to control at a very narrow point. So it could be that important information from governmental sources or wherever is not being fed to the public where it should be, but it also creates a shared understanding of the world. And this is what the benefit of having a sort of gated mainstream media was. We were all at least on the same page because we all had access to the same information. Now with this fragmentation, and because it's very poor checking, bad checking on the factual nature of the information, now we've got fragments of very partisan areas of society that legitimately loathe other areas of society, to the point where, like the left will literally say, I've been watching it all day, just kill fascists, kill fascists. I'm like, well, who are the fascists? Oh, the straight pride parade guys. It's like, really? Really, they're fascists? Fascists go around saying straight pride now, do they? No, this is a troll, but you're saying, oh, we can kill those people, we can do that. And this is why there's so much violence now. Because people legitimately hate each other for bad reasons, and there's no way of bringing that back. So I agree that there is definitely the advantage of having a dispersed media landscape. So decentralized. Sorry, yes. Media landscape where everyone gets to speak and becomes a media outlet. It's very useful. But the nature of social media is funneling us into channels, and it's doing social damage. So it swings and roundabouts.
And we are on time, which is phenomenal. First time today. Thank you, panel. Just real quick from Minds.com, it's a very, very important question, so let me please ask it. Will Tim take off his hat and prove he has hair?
I don't have hair. I don't have any
Very,
hair.
very personal question. The answer is no.
Thank you for being here. I apologize for the stutter. This event was threatened today, or in the past weeks. We have all today participated in what I understand to be operational security, aka OPSEC, as well as communication security, aka CONSEC. The location was disclosed 2 hours before, and we'll know. What can we here do today and in the days to come to alleviate and turn this ship and this tide around, or in a better direction?
I can, well, the simple words are fight back, but I guess in what capacity? So I can't speak too much about what our plans are, but I will stress one of the biggest problems we're facing right now is that there are people who are terrified of 2 or 3 random phone calls from random people who lie. And I have no idea why that works. It makes no sense. But people are so terrified to stand up for what they believe in. You have to. If you have a business and you book some seemingly nice gentleman who happens to be, a Jewish man, for instance, and he says he wants to have an event called Ending Racism, and then some crazy guy from Seattle calls you and says he's actually a Nazi, you should probably say, I'm going to Google that real quick, instead of just, you got it. So, but this is, so look.
Hang on, but there's a downside to that, because if you get the Google results, you'll find, oh, Melissa Chen said this 3 years ago. This makes her a Nazi. And there'll be 500 different outlets, all of the same political persuasion.
Exactly.
So we're in trouble.
Our society needs to become resilient to lies and smears that come from random people.
That's a great way to end that question.
I believe a lot of this nastiness that we're seeing is derived from people sensing that their unifying narratives are collapsing and there's nothing left for them to jump to. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with the author Noah Yuval Harari, who wrote *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus* and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. But in those books, he talks about how historically we lived with monotheisms to really explain our lives. And then once Nietzsche said God is dead, we moved into the age of ideological religions. And there were three ideological religions, the humanisms. There was evolutionary humanism, which was kind of like Nazism. There was socialist humanism, and there was liberal humanism. Okay, I'll get my question out. So World War II, the first one collapsed, evolutionary humanism. End of the Soviet Union, socialist humanism collapsed, and now liberal humanism is flickering. What's next? What story is next to unite people? Does anybody have a guess at what that might be?
I think maybe the Cold War against China might be the next one that we could all rally around. I think it's pretty apparent that there's a new world order that's kind of like shuffling into existence, and it's pretty scary that how much power, economic and both political, that China's gaining, and all the other countries that are developing around the world are looking, do we want to follow the Western model of democracy and human rights? Look at how they're failing, they elected Trump, that's kind of their narrative. Or do we want to follow what China's doing, state-directed capitalism, techno-surveillance? It seems to be working, and obviously in that country, there is only one narrative, right? Because, well, Twitter, everything that we love about the free world is banned there. Social media, free speech, everything. So to me, that fight seems to be, or at least trying to like mold people into like recognizing that if we don't defend this, that is our alternative and that is our future. That might be our next best hope, but that's my guess.
Quick question from Minds.com from the Candorist. Tim, I worked in the internet display ad industry. How do we solve the problem of fake news like Occupy Democrats or the Daily Beast while allowing the internet to work in its current model?
That's a tough question because it centers on free speech, the right of an organization to lie. So I will clarify with Occupy Democrats, not giving you my opinion, giving you the opinion of NewsGuard, a third-party media rating agency that says Occupy Democrats is not trustworthy. And according to Newswhip, which does an analysis on media, the biggest sources of news for the left is Occupy Democrats, and the biggest source for the right is Fox News. So the challenge is we have these two partisan outlets. One is deemed not credible, but they have a right to say what they say. So I think this may be the biggest problem liberal ideals face, in that if I respect the right of everyone to have free speech, that means people are going to lie, and they're going to lie to gain power. And as long as we're not willing to cheat the same way they will, I fear we'll lose.
Two things. One, I'd like to point out that in the program you used the wrong "your" in the title of this panel.
Who did that?
Tim?
That wasn't me.
Point of order, I did not write the programs.
Tim?
Looking at you, Sean.
Get a copy.
That guy right there. Get him.
But my
He doesn't get to ask a question now. So.
my question would be, I noticed that, like, as far as getting back to the topic of how to admit when you're wrong and cancel culture apologies not working, I've noticed that a lot of the right has been reactive to the cancel culture of the left by creating their own. And the right has stated, like Michael Knowles explicitly has said, that he wants a society based on grace where we can figure out like how to forgive each other for past transgressions. But to do that, tomorrow, but today hold them to their own standards? And I want to know, can we extend grace to them directly, or do we have to have grace based on mutually assured destruction?
We've got to do it. We've got to be the ones who do it, because they're not going to be the ones who do it. And if we just do what they do, how are we any better than them? So why would we? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, their behavior is just the worst. This is not a behavior model to emulate at all. And you're right, the right does do this. I mean, one of the things like with Milo Yiannopoulos, the way he got destroyed by the Republican Party over just throwaway comments on Joe Rogan where he was just trying to be a bit edgy and stuff like this. It was absolute nonsense, and it was a real disgrace. Milo did nothing wrong. It's really disgraceful that they do this.
Hi, as a activist for the anti-extremism and authoritarian, I have on-the-ground experience with extremist groups such as Antifa and neo-Nazis. I have coffee.
Me too, man.
I had coffee thrown on me by anti-fascists. I have been spit on by neo-Nazis. My question is, in what way can we do to get the extremists of the extreme on both sides of the political spectrum out of here? All right, because I do believe in the idea of redemption. All right, I don't believe one person's set forever in their ways. I'm a key example of that. I used to be very far right. I walked away from that because I discovered that I was no better than the very thing that I was attacking.
Okay, since no one else is going to say it, can I suggest gladiatorial combat? Pay-per-view, the moderates make the extremists fight to the death, you know?
Well,
Profitable.
I think one of the goals of a conference like this, and you know, the last panel we have, is specifically to figure out how to bring people back from the edge. So I can't necessarily speak to, you know, how we do it other than hold events, invite people in, give them a chance to speak, give them respect to hear their ideas, challenge their ideas. But I do want to make sure I stress, we have a media that has downplayed the significance of far-left extremism, and I will stress, the fringes of the far right are substantially more lethal, more alarming, and yes, we should absolutely be tracking and doing everything in our power to stop them. That doesn't mean the far left is good. It means they're both extremists. So what worries me is that when you have a media that says it's not sensational often. You know, did you know a woman just threw a Molotov cocktail into an immigration center in Florida? Yeah, that just happened last night. And so when you have a media, so I ask people, hey, did you hear about what happened in Eugene where someone planted a bomb at a police station? No. You know why? The bomb didn't go off. So as long as there is a growing left that's ineffective, the media ignores it, and to me that's worrisome. I know it doesn't really answer the question, but you know.
I think now is actually the appropriate time for the story that Tim wants to tell about me, because a few years ago Tim described me as mean, and he's not wrong. A few years ago I was.
I think I said a dick.
Oh, that's also true, but that hasn't changed. But I was mean, you know. But I was going to say to him, I wasn't always mean. That's the thing. Like, if you go and watch my very first video, I'm very mild, very polite, and not hostile at all. And it was the response that I got from the SJWs, the far left.
You get away with it because of your accent, though.
Oh, right.
I know that.
But the thing is, like, because I was constantly being bombarded by very, very aggressive and hostile messages from radical leftists, and I knew that I was right about the things that I was saying, and they weren't engaging with my arguments. If they'd at least tried to come to the table and talk to me about them or something like that, I would have been a lot more calm about these things. But they were very hostile to me, so I was like, well, you know what? To hell with you. I'm going to be hostile back. And you know, when you're doing this professionally, you can go on for quite some time. And I did get me, you know. But like you say, like a few years ago, you noted that I wasn't mean anymore, and it's because I was being invited to things like this, you know. And it makes you feel included. It makes you. It brings you back out of the wilderness, and this is why what Darrell does is so important. Right. Is bringing these people out of the wilderness. Because what's the old African saying? That's, you know, if you don't induct the men of the tribe into the tribe, they'll come back and burn it down. You know, that's what happens.
There's a really great video from CGP Grey. This video will make you angry, where he points out that people actually don't argue with each other online. They argue to themselves about the other. That's why events like this are important to be in the real world. To the best of our abilities, I understand, we, the organizers have tried very, very hard to mix things up, but it is difficult. But when you're standing in front of somebody, when you're standing in front of, when you finally, so let me tell you a little quick story. When I was like 16, I was shared some videos from these skateboarders that wore goofy clothes, and I started making fun of them, and I thought I was the funniest guy ever, and everybody was laughing, and I'm like, look how dumb they are. They're so dumb. I'm so cool. And then I met them, and they were really nice, and they helped me out a lot, and they were some of the coolest people I ever met, and boy, did I feel bad. I was like, oh my God, I'll never say these mean things again.
Man, how do you think I felt when I met Lacey Green? Like,
It's
holy
a great
shit,
story.
dude.
Let me
Tim,
stress
no more stories.
These are good stories. Come on.
I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was talking to Lacey, and Sargon came up, and Lacey's like, her reaction was like, oh, that guy, no, I am not interested. And then I don't know what happened, but I just remember seeing them like shaking hands and hugging, and I was like, oh, the mortal enemies united. Lacey's amazing, by the way.
I asked her if she wanted me to take the videos down that I'd made of her, I offered, but she said no, because it's part of the historical record, But no, the thing is, again, like I was guilty of doing the thing that I am now criticizing. I had assumed that she was just like the activists who had been aggressive towards me, and it turns out she wasn't. But it's hard to tell because of the way that the social media ecosphere works, and you've got to know when you've done wrong. And that's why I wasn't publicly shamed into apologizing to her. I felt guilty, and so I apologized to her, and that's the only way an apology is worth anything.
So real quick, do you think that apologies can be reciprocal with how we've seen basically organized chaos, especially on large liberal urban centers like Portland? Is that possible, or do you think we can't get a paradigm change in time if they disintegrate too much with the way things are going?
We're doomed. No, I mean, to try and answer the best of my abilities, I feel like there are people who are just so angry that I really am worried we don't have enough time to bring them together and show them the humanity of the other. I mean, look, we tried to put on this event legitimately. It's called Ending Racism, Violence, and Authoritarianism. I know we're not perfect people, but that's truly the intent, and that's what, at least the conversations I had with the organizers was about, like ending the violence and bringing people together, and we had activists try to shut it down. That scared the hell out of me. I'm like, wow, if we can't just have like a small town venue event with a couple hundred people, meanwhile the straight pride parade is happening somewhere else where there's going to be street conflict, we just want to talk, and they won't let us do that, that really worries me.
Last question.
So the reason we're here discussing how to show humility and admit while we're wrong and what falls under proper comedy and actually insulting someone is because we as a society have not really universally decided these boundaries. So to bring up something Tim just said a few moments ago, a whole bunch of news pieces put out stories just to blow something up, and even if they have it redacted, it's hey, we blew it up, and now we're getting a response from it. What we don't really see is somebody actually explaining and defining these lines universally without bias. And I believe a reason for that is because this ongoing discussion does rely on those blow-ups, on those personal investments, and on the greed that is really fueling, not for actual understanding. So to get to the point, do you believe, for my own personal understanding, that there is somebody behind the scenes? Have you talked to somebody with a louder voice who actually you personally feel, so I can go out and inform myself because I am trying to push this, actual boundaries and answers so we can end this and move on to other discussions? Do you know of anybody who you feel draws these certain boundaries, whatever the subject may be?
I'm sorry, I'm not really sure I understand the question. Could you formulate it in a slightly more simple way?
Is there somebody you can recommend to be a positive influence on people?
Darrell Davis. I nearly cried when I read that story for the first time. I'm not even kidding. Just like the photographs of him standing with the burning cross behind him. That man has so much more strength than I ever will, because to meet someone from the Klan and actually sit down and shake his hand and give him the time of day, I thought about what I would do in a situation like that, and I'd probably be too angry, or I can't believe he did it, and he did. It worked. I don't even know. It's just I'm honored that he would even grace us with his presence.
Spoiler alert, he's going to be here later. Guys, let's keep that applause going for everyone up here. And with that, you only have 2 minutes to finish whatever argument you're having on Twitter, and then we're back here to talk the effects of political violence.